Path of Exile 0.4 is just on the horizon, and if you've been following any of the latest patch notes, Pathfinder is looking like the meta Leaguestarter this season. So today I wanted to bring you my Poisonburst Pathfinder Leaguestarter that will take you all the way from level 1 to tier 15 maps, and even the highest tiers of pinnacle bosses. This build scales so well with little investment, and despite it being a meta choice next season, I expect it to perform very well even on a budget. It's fast, it's tanky, and it excels at both mapping and bossing. It spreads so much poison throughout the battlefield, which results in tons of bleed explosions. And then for bosses, we stack so many poisons along with a crazy juiced up damage multiplier so that bosses die in literally seconds. In this guide, I'm going to cover the leveling setup and then the endgame setup, and also what the changes are in patch 0.4 that will make Pathfinder very powerful. Build planner will be down in the comments or description below. So let's go over how the build works. So the key skill for this build is Poisonburst Arrow. This is our primary skill for mapping and is pretty much the only button we spam whilst mapping. It spreads poison, which we scale through our gear, our passive tree, and our support gem so that we can apply multiple juiced up poisons all at once. With Herald of Blood and by incorporating bleed into the build, we can cause enemies to explode. And then with Herald of Plague, our poison spreads to nearby enemies, thus carrying on the chain. Another incredible thing about Pathfinder is that you can completely ignore map mods. Through Relentless Pursuit, we cannot be slowed, so annoying map modifiers like Temporal Chains or Chilled Ground are no longer maps you avoid, which is incredible and honestly reduces so many deaths. For bossing, we use a combination of Gas Arrow and then we spam Toxic Growth, which releases these pustules which explode and deal massive amounts of poison damage. In the endgame setup, we then also incorporate a near 100% shock debuff, which doubles our poison damage by using Stormcaller Arrow and Voltaic Mark, which lets you defeat tier 3 pinnacle bosses in seconds with ease. Why Pathfinder is going to be even better in patch 0.4 is because we're getting multiple changes to the Ascendancy nodes. Running Assault is going to be ridiculous, and our sprint will no longer be able to be heavy stunned, which means we no longer need to use the row amount and can just sprint around for movement. Pathseeker is going to be a great node that lets you dip into other classes' start points and gives you more passive points, and then Traveler's Wisdom is now going to let you gain 5% increased damage and 5% increased global defenses instead of attribute nodes. So if you have good gear and can hit attribute requirements there, then you can really juice up your character's defenses, especially as global defenses is such a good defensive modifier. Let's start off by briefly covering the leveling setup. For level 1 to 14, you want to be using Lightning Arrow, and then a combination of Lightning Rod and Lightning Arrow for bosses. You also want to take Plague Bearer as your first spirit gem, as that's great for stronger packs of enemies and bosses later on. Poison isn't great for the first 14 levels, you'll be doing very little damage. Once you get to level 14 and get your level 5 skill gem from the Executioner, you'll be able to unlock Toxic Growth. So now we can do some good poison boss damage, so we switch over to Poisonburst Arrow as well. So now you can run around with Poisonburst Arrow, and on big packs you hit Plague Bearer as well. And then for bosses, initially we use Toxic Growth and Plague Bearer to trigger the explosions. And then in Act 2 we unlock Gas Arrow, which we can now use instead of Plague Bearer to trigger our Toxic Growth. You can also incorporate Vine Arrow, which can help to apply some slows and make kiting enemies a bit easier, but it is optional in my eyes. Your second spirit gem you want to incorporate is Herald of Plague to help spread poisons better, and then eventually we want to add in our defensive buffs into the build, first Wind Dancer and then Ghost Dance. Once you reach near the end of the campaign or early maps, at that point you want to start incorporating Herald of Blood and Bleed into your build. One thing to note, an incredible leveling unique to look out for is Sliver Tongue, which will literally carry your poison DPS from Act 3 all the way to tier 15 maps. It's insane. Plague Finger is another incredible leveling unique to look out for because it allows all elemental damage to contribute to poison magnitude. Usually in PoE2, poison damage is calculated on the initial hits combined additive physical and additive chaos damage, i.e. added physical damage to attacks and added chaos damage to attacks. But with Plague Finger, this will allow added lightning, cold, fire damage, all of these to contribute to poison magnitude as well, which is insane, especially for the campaign when you have less choice over the drops you get. Plague Finger can actually be used in endgame builds as well when you have top tier rings and gloves with lots of additive elemental damage. As I'm already discussing some parts of how poison damage is scaled, it's important to know what other things can scale poison damage. So we've already talked about added physical damage, which you can find on your bow, quiver, gloves and rings, which is going to be a key modifier to look out for. Damage with bow skills on your quiver is also really important. And then we have poison magnitude or ailment magnitude, increased poison stacks, poison duration, and poisons deal damage faster will all scale poison damage. Poison works quite differently in PoE2, and crit chance and critical damage bonus also apply to poison damage scaling, so we pick up a lot of these nodes and affixes. Shock will also work on poison, which we incorporate heavily into the build, and then added chaos damage will work, but this is quite a rare stat in PoE2. What you don't want to prioritize is added lightning, added cold, or added fire damage in the build, as this will not scale poison damage at all unless you're using Plague Finger. Increased chaos damage from your passive tree or your gear isn't a great modifier either, as it doesn't work directly on the poison, but it works on the additive chaos damage you have in the build, which for most people will be very little to none. Attack speed isn't great for the build either. It looks great visually to fire out lots of arrows faster, but it actually doesn't make the poison better. Chance to poison is also useless, as our main skills always poison at 100% chance. In terms of defenses for the build, we have 75% resistances across the board, and then you want to aim for a bit more chaos resistance as well. We are using Hybrid Life and Energy Shield along with Evasion. We definitely want to be using a hybrid build for patch 0.4, as global defenses buff all of these, and if you use something like Chaos Inoculation, then you're missing out on the life boost. In terms of mana, there are two things that basically solve mana for the build. Leech is one method, and you ideally want Leech's physical damage as mana as an affix on your gloves or ring. You can also roll it on your weapon, but that's a wasted affix on your weapon in my eyes. Leech will solve mana for bossing. And then for mapping, you want a jewel, a sapphire with 2% mana on kill, and again that will basically solve your mana issues there. Now you understand the basic mechanics of the build, let me go over the skill gems for the endgame setup. So for Poisonburst Arrow, make sure to prioritize qualitying this to 20% for increased poison magnitude. We're using Deadly Poison 2 to increase the magnitude of our poison, Bleed 3 so we can incorporate a bleed into the build, Bursting Plague which is another damage over time added, and Fork so our Poisonburst Arrow can spread further. Then we have Rigwald's Ferocity. We use the Weapon Set 2 bonus for Rigwald's Ferocity, which is 30% more damage, and we then set all of our skills within the build to Weapon Set 2, generally apart from Stormcaller Arrow, which we use Weapon Set 1, as our Weapon Set 1 passives all boost shock, magnitude, and duration, but I'll talk about that a little bit later in the video. For Toxic Growth, we want to use Long Fuse 2 for more damage, Concentrated Area for more damage again, and then Arakali's Lust, which is actually getting buffed in patch 0.4 for more damage with hits, Deadly Poison 2, and Escalating Poison. For Gas Arrow, we're using Multi-Shot 2, Deadly Poison 2, and Persistent Ground 3, which is really important and a support gem you want to incorporate as soon as possible whilst leveling. This will stop your gas arrow from being detonated by random flame effects in the game, Encroaching Ground, and Overreach. For Stormcaller Arrow, again you want to quality this for 30% increased shock duration. As I mentioned, this will apply our shock. Our support gems are Shock to increase the shock chance, Lasting Shock for more duration, Overcharge so our shock magnitude is increased, but this does reflect your shock back onto you. But thanks to our next support gem, Commiserate, when we refire Stormcaller Arrow, we can take off shock from ourselves and increase shock magnitude even further. So yeah, on bossing, just fire Stormcaller Arrow a couple of times. Lightning Attunement is the final support gem for a bit more lightning damage. Voltaic Mark is our skill which we apply onto bosses for more chance to shock and 45% more shock effect. Remember to quality this gem as well for more shock effect. Here we have Prolonged Duration 2, Efficiency 2, and Lightning Mastery. Then we finally have our two Heralds. For Herald of Blood we have Poison 3, Bleed 3, Bursting Plague, Overreach, and Deadly Poison 2. And then for Herald of Plague we have Chaos Mastery as the only support gem. For our defensive buffs we have Wind Dancer and Ghost Dance. For Wind Dancer you want Poison 3, Bleed 3, Maim, and Blind 2. And then for Ghost Dance you want Compressed Duration 1, and then Precision for a bit more accuracy rating. Let's go over our gear. For your bow, you ideally want an Obliterator bow as that has the highest base physical damage rolls, but a Gemini bow for the extra arrow can feel pretty nice for early mapping. We want as high physical damage as possible through percentage physical damage and added physical damage being high tier 1 or tier 2 rolls. Gain extra damage as physical damage is also another great prefix. Then for your suffixes, you want critical hit chance. Instead of the critical damage bonus I have here, as that is a multiplicative critical hit chance boost. Plus 4 levels to attack skills, And then for your final suffix, you want chance to gain onslaught on kill. Here you ideally want the Talisman of Thraldana, which applies more poison into the build, but this will be an expensive talisman. Cheaper rune options include greater iron runes for more physical damage. For your quiver, you want a visceral quiver with the critical hit chance increase for attacks implicit. Here you want flat physical damage, increased damage with bow skills, and then your third prefix you have a little bit of choice. I'll just add in some more elemental flat damage in case you ever want to switch to Plague Finger. Then for your suffixes, you want critical hit chance for attacks, +2 projectile levels, and then critical damage bonus for attack damage. For your rings, my rings are pretty bad here and left over from some other builds, but ideally you want physical flat damage, resistances, stats such as intelligence and strength so you can spend more of your passive points on global defenses, rarity, and then a mandatory stat on one of your rings has to be leeches physical damage as mana. This will solve all your mana issues whilst bossing, or you can aim to have this affix on your gloves instead. If you're not using Plague Finger, then rings with multiple additive damage affixes are not necessary, which makes this setup cheap in my eyes. However, if you are using Plague Finger, then a ring like this one with high physical and high elemental damage is better. So before I start talking about the amulet, you need +30 spirit within the build. Whether you have that on your amulet or your chest piece, the choice is up to you depending on your budget and what you find in terms of drops. Then on your amulet you want +3 to projectile skills, global defenses, and then you want a mixture of critical hit chance, critical damage bonus, and then either some resistances, stats, and or rarity. For your helmet you want a pure energy shield helmet because then we can take advantage of subterfuge mask to gain both energy shield and evasion. Here you want as high an energy shield roll as possible with resistances, reduced attribute requirement, and rarity. Reduced attribute requirement is going to lower the intelligence you need for the build, as usually a pure energy shield helmet will require over 110 intelligence. So this will let you again put more stats into global defenses. For your chest piece you want an evasion ES hybrid with maximum life and resistances. You don't need the spirit I have here, we only need 30 additional spirit for the build, but if you're finding spirit on amulet is expensive, then you can go for spirit on your chest piece. For your boots, again, evasion ES hybrid with as high a movement speed roll as possible, and then resistances and rarity. For your belt, the best belt for mapping is Headhunter as usual. If you don't have this, then Rislatha's Ornate Belt is a good alternative that gives more physical damage. Otherwise, a rare belt with maximum life and resistances will suffice here. I've got pure evasion gloves, but again you ideally want evasion ES hybrid. Here you want physical damage, critical damage bonus, resistances, and stats. Here you want to socket the rune for Courtesan's Manian Rune of Cruelty, which increases our poison magnitude, but this will likely be an expensive rune. So for a budget build, you can use the Rune of Claws for a bit more additive physical damage. You can get double socket Corrupted Gloves with 2 of these runes, and then with the affix 100% greater effective socketed items, that will double the effect of the poison magnitude from the runes. But yeah, that is an expensive item. For our passive tree, let's start off with the Ascendancy nodes. These are going to change with 0.4. Contagious Contamination is going to be removed, so the first node you want to pick up with your first 2 Ascendancy points is Overwhelming Toxicity, which is really going to help with early campaign poison damage. Then you want both Relentless Pursuit, and we will be getting Running Assault for the Goated Sprint without Heavy Stun in 0.4. Our final 2 points will probably go into Pathseeker, which is another new node, but I'll wait till release to finalize this. In terms of passive points, you'll see I have 2 sets of passive points depending on weapon sets. We use the same weapons on both weapon sets. The reason we have 2 sets of passive points is because we want to maximize our shock debuff through Stormcaller Arrow. Weapon set 2 are the green passive points, and these are basically the base passive points for the poison build. We get poison nodes, critical hit chance, and damage nodes, and a variety of defensive nodes that are common to most builds that start on this side of the tree. Every skill apart from Stormcaller Arrow should be set to weapon set 2 to take advantage of these nodes. For weapon set 1, we can pick up these additional red nodes here, which basically all improve our shock duration and more importantly our shock magnitude. We set this to Stormcaller Arrow so the shock it applies is super juiced up and benefits from these specific passive points. This means when we apply the shock to an enemy with Stormcaller Arrow, the shock itself can be as close to 100% shock magnitude and lasts for about 30 seconds, which is insane. I do highly recommend doing this setup with 2 sets of weapon set passives, as this is going to really help you with the highest tier bosses, but it isn't necessary when you're first starting the build. Just follow the green skill points if you're worried about that, and that will let you do most of the content in the game. Do remember at least to set Poisonburst Arrow to weapon set 2, however, because you want to take advantage of Rigwald's Ferocity. Finally, for our duels, we have our Sapphire with 2% mana on kill, which will solve our mana issues whilst mapping. We also want maximum energy shield and critical damage bonus here. Here we want an Emerald with increased magnitude of poison and increased poison duration, and then other useful modifiers include increased damage with bows, projectile damage, chance to shock. Our endgame duel upgrade is going to be an Against the Darkness Time Lost Diamond, and here you want the affix notable passives grant damage as extra elemental damage. The element can be chaos or any other element, it doesn't matter, that will give you an incredible DPS boost for your poison. A double damage roll here will be expensive, so start off with a single extra damage affix roll like I have. If you can't afford that, then just duplicate another emerald with similar stats to my previous emerald. So there you have it, my Poisonburst Pathfinder Leaguestarter that will take you from level 1 all the way to the highest tier of pinnacle bosses. It's already an incredible build in patch 0.3, and it's only going to get better in patch 0.4. If you want to follow this build in the upcoming patch, remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more PoE2 builds. I'm Mr. Ronnet, and that's it for today. Peace out, guys.